Lisa, welcome. We're so excited you could join us.
Sam, I am really happy to be here. I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
I knew from the moment we met and we did our Zoom call and we started talking about the buyer and how they were thinking about things that we had to do a webinar on the topic just because I
Well,
think it's opened up so many doors for people.
well, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's so interesting because I've never technically been in sales. I've always been on the other side of the table. But ultimately, when I think about how I liked being sold to, um, there's a lot of things to think about just differently than what you might typically do. And so I think that that really helped me be successful as I ended up being on the other side of the table and selling product to a retailer after having been at a retailer for a really long time.
Yeah, and I want to dive into all of that because your background is insane between the retail footprint and then also being on the brand side. And just to give people some context of your CPG roadmap, like how did you start? Where did you end? And learnings along the way.
Absolutely. So I have been doing the retail and merchandising thing for over 30 years. I say it out loud and I'm like, oh my gosh, how can that be the case? But it is, and I embrace it because I've learned so much. A majority of my career has been with Target stores. So I started right out of college, and Target brings you in as a business analyst, focusing on inventory management. So I got to learn that side of the business before I moved over to being a buyer, which I think made me a much better buyer because it wasn't just about buying pretty things. It was about understanding that, number one, you have to own product in order to be able to sell it. But just because you love it doesn't mean that the business model and the budget is going to support it. So that was a great learning for me. But through the course of my time with Target, I was in a variety of different product categories and actually different channels. At one point in time, Target was very bifurcated from a brick and mortar and an online perspective. It ran almost like two separate companies. And so one of the things that I was also able to do with Target was help them, from a strategy perspective, really come to their point of view on omni-channel. And interestingly enough, I actually had two stints at Target. I was at Target for 9 years, and then I was recruited by Amazon.com to have them help me start their toy store online, which was one of the first two product categories that they engaged with after music, movies, and books. So toys and consumer electronics. So this was back in '99, and super interesting. But it got me really, really energized about understanding what was the ecosystem that a consumer could really engage with and buy product. And it wasn't just all about brick and mortar. I mean, it was certainly, direct to consumer was certainly something to be considered. So I actually went back to Target in 2002 and was there for another 13 years. So, and throughout the course of other years in my career, I've also had experience with both specialty and department stores, specialty including Eddie Bauer and Petco, as well as department stores, with Nordstrom. So, and again, Nordstrom, I was on the Nordstrom.com side of the business, which at one point was very separate from department stores. So it's just interesting to watch the evolution of retail and how retail is really changed. Someone told me it's like retail will never be as slow as it is today. And it's true
Mhm.
because, it's just going to continue to change. Um, but ultimately, Petco is what brought me to San Diego. And when my role was eliminated there, I knew two things. I knew one, I wasn't going to find big box in San Diego. Petco was kind of it. And two, I was not leaving San Diego. After having grown up in the Midwest and worked in the Midwest for a majority of my life, San Diego is just fantastic. So I decided that I needed to do some research. And I did and realized there's a lot happening in San Diego. It's just on a smaller scale than what I was used to at Target. So long story short, I ended up on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing privately held companies in 2019. And number 20 on the entire list was a little company called Kindred Bravely, based out of Oceanside. They are a maternity and nursing intimates and apparel brand. And I decided that I would cold call them, that I would send my resume And that I would basically say, be very candid, like, I know you don't have a role for me. That said, I know I could help you. And so within 48 hours, one of the co-founders reached out. She asked me to coffee. And so we spent the next 90 days just talking about their business. They asked me lots of questions. They asked my opinion on a lot of things. And ultimately, they hired me as their president in January 2nd of 2020, which may sound ominous because we all know 6 weeks later the world shut down, but they had the forethought to create a natively remote brand. And so that was not the issue. More the issue was making sure that we had product. So over the course of my tenure there, I took the sales volume essentially almost 5 times what it was when I started, and EBITDA almost 8.5 times what I started. I was able to get an exclusive brand, Kindred by Kindred Bravely, into Target, again, leveraging my expertise, having been on the other side of the table. And there's just great partnerships with Lancino and with some key marketing opportunities with the Lactation Network and the channel, the Durable Medical Equipment channel. So lots of really great, interesting, different ways to think about retail than what I had traditionally learned in Target. And now, my time with Kindred finished at the end of August of this year. So I am currently looking for my next role and looking to stay either in San Diego or be remote because I'd really just love to grow another company the way that I grew Kindred.
Well, I love the move of just reaching out and saying,
Mhm.
hey, I think I can. I've hired so many people that have done that where I did not have a role for them, but they reached out and the time came. So I love that move. And what you were kind of connecting with the dots there is the topic I really want to dive into today, which is how the perspective of the buyer and like understanding that psychology can help a brand be successful. So even taking that to Kindred Bravely, I want to look at some of the experiences that you had there. But before we dive too much into that, I'd love to kind of back up in the story. And when you were a buyer, what was important to you? And what were your priorities even before you were looking at a potential brand to put on the shelf?
So essentially, as a buyer, you owned a P&L. And so your first priority was making sure that you had an assortment that could deliver on that P&L. And a lot of it had to do with, in some cases, just physical space. If you were being merchandised on a shelf, in order to fit additional items on a shelf, something else had to go away. So again, from a supplier, from a brand perspective, you want to make sure that if you are approaching a buyer with a new opportunity, that that product fills a white space. So something that is not currently in the assortment, and making sure that that you're not just trying to serve up something that will create an either or situation, that the guest or the consumer will come in and they'll be like, oh, I'm going to buy this or buy this. It's how can you create an and situation within your offering. But also, again, back as a buyer and thinking about it, obviously, margin was a big consideration in making sure that I was going to be able to deliver off on the profitability piece of the equation, that there was an opportunity for me to be first to market and to provide a point of differentiation. Again, it was, especially in my time at Target, it was really about Target had that cachet of being, something different than a typical big box store. So that was also very important to me. And making sure that, again, I was being able to offer the consumer the opportunity, and not only for them, but for me as a retailer to be able to add to the basket versus create that decision between this or that.
It's an interesting way to think about it, the and versus the or,
Mhm.
where how do you complement what's there? How do you not? Obviously, there's a lot of competition in consumer goods, but if it's just direct competition, that could create more challenges than benefits. And I think I've heard so many stories of different founders and different entrepreneurs and how they got the buyer, how they got on shelf. I mean, there's everything from Sarah Blakely and trying on, the Spanx in the bathroom to
Right.
It Cosmetics. They're like following people at events and sending samples and emails. And I think you hear about cold email campaigns. So, in your opinion, like what's the best way to get in front of a buyer? How do you reach out? What are things that you've seen be successful, and what are things that maybe weren't so successful or that you would advise against?
So I think a lot of it is doing your homework. And it is really having a solid understanding of what is the current assortment that exists. What is potentially, again, the white space that I can fill. And ultimately, it is making sure that you have done enough homework where you can start to connect the dots to say, I can see what the strategy is here. And here's how I can make the strategy better. I think one of the things that really made I mean, granted, I had quite a few connections at Target, and a lot of brands don't have that. So I do think it's interesting to look into a potential broker within the cities. I know specifically for Target, there are a lot of different brokers that are ex-Target. So they know the buyers, they know the process, they know the systems, and there's a price associated with it, but that price is definitely worth um, having someone in your corner in order to be able to help you with all of those kind of small details, because it can get overwhelming with the amount. Target has, a vendor guide, and I'm sure Walmart and all the others have vendor guides that are just thick and detailed and complicated. And it's really nice to have someone who's worked at Target basically help you out with that. And I would say the thing that um, does not work, or at least it didn't work for me as a buyer, is this concept of, okay, I'm going to just present everything and see what sticks. It really is about being surgical and about doing your homework and making sure you understand the white space and providing a solution that is a solution for both the merchant as well as the consumer that they're selling to. So those are key things to think about as you're approaching a buyer.
Awesome. That's very helpful. And we have a lot of people that tune in from different stages of their journey. So some are founders that are maybe breaking into their first retailer. Some are saying, how do I go nationwide in Walmart after doing, more natural or specialty stores? Some are introducing a new SKU. So we have like all different types of CPG operators and founders that are tuning in. Maybe for the earlier stage folks, could you walk me through like what does the process look like of talking to a buyer, getting on shelf? Like, how would they navigate that?
Well, I think the first key element is for there to be really some social proof behind the product that you can easily share based on your relationship with your current customer, direct to consumer, what the consumer is saying about the product, why they like it. Retailers really want to, it's hard, it can be more difficult for a brick and mortar to have the same kind of relationship with the customer that a direct to consumer brand can. And so they're looking to sort of duplicate that. So making sure that you have a really great story to tell. And it's the story of, why did this product come to be? What kind of problem were you trying to solve? How was this a solution that you think made sense? So that is something that's really important in early stage, as well as whatever stage that you're in this. You just have a really good story. The other thing to think about and to remember is that a lot of bigger retailers like to leverage their .com space in order to essentially test and learn. So to not get dissuaded or discouraged if your first conversation with the buyer is not, oh yes, we're going to bring you into, for Target 1,800 doors, or for Walmart 4,500 doors, but rather we want to put you on our website and understand what that means, because a lot of retailers have put a lot of eggs into the digital basket. And if they can get a penetration in the digital space that is really healthy, 20% or above, that's super important to them. So getting one or two styles on a .com where you're drop shipping, that is not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because it also then helps you get data. And presenting data to a buyer is just gold, right? It's all about the numbers. And so if you've got that information and that data to help you, it is a great way to just continue the conversation, to be able to provide additional thoughts and solutions, and then work your way up into actually getting into the store locations. And then from a store perspective, it is also okay to not be in all doors. All doors are not created equal. So a smaller majority of the doors for any retailer are going to provide the largest number or the largest percentage of their total sales. So if you get into 200 doors or 400 doors, that's a great testing ground, because not only does it help the retailer understand what you're capable of, but it also helps you get all of your ducks in a row, because the retailer is going to expect that you are reliable, that you say what you're going to do, or that you do what you say you're going to do, that you aren't dropping the ball. And sometimes it's just better to be at a smaller scale to work out the kinks than to, get that all door opportunity and then not have something work in your supply chain or something from a technical perspective or whatever that looks like.
That is such great advice, because we have seen that where somebody will get nationwide distribution, but maybe they don't have the ability to support those doors, and then they're not meeting their expectations with that buyer. And from there, it becomes really challenging to kind of salvage that relationship and to retain your door count. I'm curious to look a bit at the relationship with the buyer once you're on shelf. So,
Absolutely.
okay, we just got 200 to 400 doors, and we want to show success here, maybe over X amount of time. What does that relationship look like, and how do we show success in the best way?
Mhm. So the best advice I can give is to create a partnership with the buyer. This is an opportunity for this to be a mutually beneficial opportunity. And so providing data and analysis is really important. Basically, how can you make the buyer's life easier? And how can you continue to be an expert? Because a lot of brands, they're a bit more niche. They've got some education behind them in regards to why this product is different, and how the buyer can think differently about merchandising, about advertising, about all those different elements. So I think the biggest nugget of advice that I would give is, in this partnership, make yourself indispensable. Like, how can you just make it so that the buyer's like, I never want to eliminate this relationship because it's just so good. There's never there's never a conversation about excuses. It's a conversation about solutions, because things are going to go wrong. Things are going to happen. A boat's going to sink. Something's going to happen. But it's about being able, as a brand, to put yourself in the seat of the buyer and be able to make decisions, approach conversations in such a way where the buyer just is very dependent on you to have continued success. And once they trust you, it's all about trust. You can easily then pitch the next item, and the, kind of the machinations that you had to go through to kind of get started become smaller, because they trust you. They know that what you say is valid and is going to, again, be mutually beneficial, and is going to drive sales and margin on their end. And then obviously it does the same thing for you.
I want to put all of that on like a series of mugs. Like, make yourself indispensable, come with solutions, not excuses, a foundation of trust. I almost feel like that is just the crux of business in any relationship, in any partnership. And it can be easy to forget, maybe, that the buyer is your partner, you guys have the same goals, which is trying to drive revenue for the retailer, which drives revenue for the brand. And the more alignment between the two, I think the smoother the partnership, to your point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you do not have to be best friends. You do not necessarily have to like each other. That said, if you are hyper focused on the customer, because that's where it all starts, right? If you're hyper focused on the customer, and making sure that you are meeting the customer's expectations, that you are serving the customer. I mean, that's the beauty, right? That's the secret sauce, because then they're loyal, they come back, their lifetime value is much greater. So it really is that mutual focus on the customer.
And I don't think I knew that you were on the ground floor of Amazon. I don't think we had talked about that, but that's very interesting.
It is really interesting. It was a very interesting time in my career. It was, you know, when you hear about the early days of Amazon, and people did anything and everything that they needed to do to support the business, I lived it. So the week before Christmas, I was at the Fernley Distribution Center in Reno, Nevada, and I was wrapping gifts, and I was helping fulfill orders. You do what you need to do. Is incredibly scrappy. I those two categories was the first time that Amazon was actually purchasing inventory. Music, movies, and books was a distributor model. So essentially, the beauty of that was that they would sell product before they had to pay for it, which was ideal. I mean, granted, in those early days, they were definitely not profitable; they were losing money, but that was an awesome business model, whereas owning inventory was very different, and taking your own photos, and working with suppliers and brands who couldn't classify what you were. They couldn't classify you as mass, they couldn't classify you as specialty, they couldn't classify you as department store. So everybody sold to you, which was also a really big change from my time at Target. So yeah, it was interesting. There were lots of happy hours at the different headquarters. I think I moved offices 3 or 4 times within the time frame that I was there, just because things were exploding so quickly. And yeah, I definitely, not that he would remember, but I definitely, had some toast with Mr. Bezos over nachos. So
That is amazing. And I mean, you come with this retail, full understanding of retail, having been in the inner workings of it, and really the emergence of D2C in a lot of ways. And that lands you through a variety of experiences at Kindred Braidley. And when you came, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is they were D2C. They hadn't broken into retail quite yet, right?
it really hadn't. They had partnered with Fair, so they were in some smaller boutiques throughout the country, and they had just started to scratch the surface with Nordstrom as a dropship supplier, but did not have any experience with an actual physical store, because they were only on .com with Nordstrom. So their goal was to get into retail, and ultimately felt like Target was the perfect alignment. And when Kindred was bought by private equity in 21, they did, as part of their due diligence, they did some market research and basically asked consumers the question, which retailer would you want to see Kindred Braidley in? And Target was far and away where people wanted to see it. So it was this great kind of serendipitous thing that I had experience at Target, and had an ability and understanding of, from a buyer's perspective, how to best approach that. And it really worked out. It really worked out well from the perspective of, I looked at their assortment and I understood what they were trying to do, but I could also see very clearly that pumping was not something that they were addressing within their assortment. So I think the first time that we pitched them, we might have pitched them 4 styles, and they took 2. So it was, like I said, it was very surgical. It was like, I am trying to solve a problem for you. You are not addressing this customer. And this is what we're known for. So that is the perfect opportunity for you to introduce this brand. It was the highest price point that Target had in um, their intimate floor pad. I think we started at $34.99, and the next highest retail that they had on the floor pad was $22.99. So there was a big difference.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it worked out. It worked out great. That for 25, they're bringing in 2 more styles. So
Well, it hit everything on your rubric, right? It was
yeah,
new to market. You were solving a problem. You found the white space, articulated why it was such a need, told the
mhm.
story, and
Had
from
social proof from our direct to consumer about why people really loved it. There was some IP associated with it, so I mean, it really was the perfect introduction.
and I can see why the customers wanted to shop at Target. It's amazing. I was there for our holiday party yesterday. Just got lost in different sections, getting things I don't need. But from a leadership perspective, because I now want to put on like the operator hat at the brand,
Mhm.
as you're navigating the transition from the brand being, exclusively D2C with a few .com properties to, okay, now we're going to be on shelf.
Mhm.
Beyond just getting into Target, there's probably a lot happening in the background of the business to make that
Absolutely.
transition happen. And what did that transition look like?
Well, I think a lot of what we didn't know was what sort of cannibalization might we see,
Mm,
because the product, while it was slightly different than the brand.com version, it wasn't exponentially different because we also didn't want to dilute our brand overall. So it's this fine line. And part of being very surgical about what we offered Target was because we knew if a Target consumer could find Kindred in their local Target store and really like what they were experiencing, that they would come to brand.com and then discover a whole market of products that we offer that solve different problems, that address different times within her postpartum journey. You definitely want to think about and have a strategy around what are the items that you are willing to take to a wholesaler, because you do have to protect brand.com, and you have to protect uh, making sure that you are not just all of a sudden transferring all those sales to a lower price point and not being able to continue to drive volume in your own space. Which part of the way we approached it with Target was we already offered bundles. So essentially, in from a nursing perspective, this is a fun story I want to share with you. So Deanne, who is one of the co-founders, she was a high school math teacher by trade. But what she really enjoyed about the business was the design element and really solving problems for the consumer. And kind of her math background really helped her um, with the design piece of the business. And so we were talking about product one day, and somehow we got on the subject of she and Garrett being in Costa Rica, she and her husband being in Costa Rica, and how they had to carry everything on their back, and how she had only 3 pair of underwear for this journey, one to wash, one to wear, and a spare. And I swear Deanne was a closet marketer, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that is brilliant. Because when you think about nursing, you don't just need one nursing bra, you need one to wash, one to wear, and a spare. And
mm,
so we created a bundle, which at the price that we were selling at was essentially the same retail per bra that we were selling for Target. So she was still getting an opportunity to get that same price point of brand.com on our website and have that bundle. Versus the singles at Target. And so that was also a way that we could continue to make sure that we weren't just trading off the sales of, our hands-free pumping bra on the website to what people were finding in the stores. So there is a whole process. If I could go back in time, having been with KB for 4.5 years, and to think about, for example, Amazon and how I would have approached Amazon differently than the way we started. The biggest issue with Amazon, even though Kindred did not offer the entire assortment that they offered on brand.com, there was enough that when a competitor came in with basically knockoffs at much lower retails and an aggressive ad and marketing spend, that market share quickly went away. And so, hindsight being 2020, I think I would have done Amazon very differently too, anticipating that there would just be competition that would come in that would be much lower priced, much lower quality, but the consumer doesn't know what they don't know until they have it in their hands or can do the compare and contrast. So I feel like I rambled a little bit on that question, but
No, every word of that was so interesting because the problems that you're articulating, I think, are the biggest problems that are facing brands that are trying to do an omni-channel approach.
Mhm.
And knowing what the hurdles are ahead of time, like you said, like if you had certain perspectives 4 years ago, there could have been different strategies or tactics that were utilized. And how do you not cannibalize the business while retaining brand equity when you have different products at different price points? Like these are the problems that
Right.
CPG brands need to solve. So every word of that was valuable.
Awesome. Yeah, it is. It is. I had a mentor very early in my career, and one of the things that he said to me, and I remember it today because it's so true, is just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Mm.
And so, again, having a strategy around wholesale, whether that be, on a more of a marketplace where you're drop shipping, whether that be physically in brick and mortar, whether that be some other sort of partnership, having a roadmap and a plan of what that looks like and kind of pre-thinking what the impacts to the brand will be, I think is a good exercise. Granted, things happen and, things take off and, but having at least a roadmap to begin with, I think is really, really important.
And I'm curious, so I know somebody has to be curious to role play out.
Uh-huh.
Say you were at a new brand today and you were going to launch on Amazon and you knew that there was going to be a lower priced product, lower quality, but would have ad spend to compete. Like, how would you navigate that problem differently with the perspective you now have?
I would definitely look to see if there would be a different way to bring the product. Again, maybe it's a bundle, maybe it's something very unique. I would call it maybe even a separate brand, right? Like going into Amazon knowing that there's going to be price points, a price point war. Is there a lower price version of what you're doing that you could essentially use as a means for competition? I think it really depends on the category. So it's hard to say just from carte blanche, like this is what I would do. But I know that I would have that conversation with myself and my leadership team on how are we going to ensure that we are protecting the brand and being competitive, or do we even want to go down that path? Because I always say this, once that heroin needle is in, it's really hard to pull it out. So
Mhm.
even asking yourself the question of, is this the right way to go for us, depending on what the category is? Is it easily something easy to be knocked off? Or does it have just that either IP or cachet or something that's really going to still allow it to be successful? Because the hard part is Amazon is a search engine, right? And people start their search on Amazon. They're also spearfishing. They're also very focused in on what it is they're looking to buy. So it's just taking all of those things into consideration.
Yeah, I did give you a very broad question when I said like
You did.
any strategy. The category, the product type would definitely change a bit. And on the omni-channel, kind of looking forward,
Mhm.
I'm curious. Well, I guess maybe we'll look at an example and then a looking forward question. With the digital properties that you had, were you leveraging like an email list or a CRM or SMS to support Target? What did your support strategy look like for retail?
Well, it's really interesting. When we first launched, we definitely leveraged all of those tools that you referenced in our toolkit to help people understand that it was available at Target. Beyond that, for someone who is a smaller brand, when you go into Target, or you go into Walmart, they've got their different marketing levers that they present to you. And the starting price tag is like 75 grand. So for a lot of brands, that's just a no-go. I mean, that's like a Nestle or some other large CPG. That's kind of their playground. So again, it goes back to partnering with your buyer on coming up with some different and maybe unique ways of getting the brand out there. And the one thing that I will also say within this section is that you have to make sure you have a margin structure that is going to support all of the different fees that are associated with retail and brick and mortar. There are co-ops that they expect, there are markdown allowances that they expect. So you have to make sure that all works. But within the scope of that, if it then does work for you, that's when you have to have just conversations with your buyers and be creative. And, ultimately, one of the things that specifically for Kindred, there were a lot of adjacent product categories for their baby sales that it made sense that we would be included in that. And so just thinking differently, having conversations about how you might actually get your product featured. Again, it goes back to that partnership. So one
Yeah.
of the things that I've learned throughout my career is if the worst, you have to ask. And the worst thing that can happen is someone says no, but you have to ask the question. So don't be afraid to ask. Again, they may say no, but ultimately, if you don't ask, you don't get.
And in my experience, people really don't say no that often. If
They
you
they
if you
really
ask, the
don't.
answer is usually yes, or some very maybe not right now, but it's very, very rarely a blanket no.
It's rarely a blanket no, or it leads to a conversation of, well, I can't do this, but I could do this. And again, it's just that solution sort of approach. And so everyone gives a little bit and you figure something out.
And we just had an audience question come
Mhm.
in, so I'll pop into that for a second. But are there any seasonal or promotional opportunities that brands should be aligning with to help support sales?
I'm going to answer this question in a couple of ways. Seasonal or promotional opportunities are actually a great way to even get your foot in the door. And what I mean by that is, for a back to school season or, holiday season, if there's something that you could bring to the table that might not sit within a home location, but be part of, some sort of story within the holiday shop or, the back to school shop, those are great ways to think about how to get your foot in the door, again, to get data to prove out what's important. But I would say from a promotional or seasonal perspective, if there's some sort of a great bundle or a deal or something that you can do, an exclusive product that you can make, that is always something that could get you in multiple locations in the store outside of the home location, in one of those special areas. So um, be creative. Again, partner with your merchant, throw ideas out there, throw up some trial balloons, say, hey, I've been thinking about this, I've been thinking about, holiday time frame, wouldn't it be great if, and just get them on, essentially to pique their interest and shake their head. Yeah, I'd like to learn more about that. And start those. My biggest advice is start those conversations early. Retail is essentially a year out, right? Christmas is done, holiday is done. If you have an idea, start pitching it, because ultimately they've got handcuffs. They have to figure out planograms, they have to figure out signing, they have to figure out all of these things, and it takes a really long time. So be proactive versus reactive. That is definitely something you have to keep in mind.
The timing note is a good one because it's actually wild how far in advance these things are planned. You know,
It
back
is
to school
crazy.
for 2026 is conversations with certain brands depending on where
Mhm.
their schedules
Exactly.
are.
Exactly. So the more proactive that you can be, again, ask the merchant, what does your timeline look like? When should I be coming to you with these ideas? They'll tell you. It's just probably not as tight of a time frame as you're used to within your D2C world because you don't have those same constraints.
And we had one more question come in that I think we can fit in, but how important are in-store experiences like demos, displays, and tasting stations for customers?
So when I look at what the trends are in terms of retail in the future, it's all about customer experience and expectations. So the more, and I see so many different things on, especially on LinkedIn, where there's examples of kind of what the old packaging was versus what the new packaging was and how much more volume the new packaging did. Anything that's going to make it jump off of the shelf, anything that's going to get it into the hands of the consumer as they're walking through the store. Those are all really good things to think about and pursue, because from a trend perspective, shopping is becoming much more experiential. When you think about the fact that social commerce and people just they buy it when they see it, and if it's out in front of the aisle versus in the aisle, down up on a shelf that's maybe not eye level. Those are all great things. So if you have a product category that supports that, I would definitely, definitely look into how you can capitalize on that.
That's why everyone loves the Costco samples, right? Like you walk
Exactly.
around, you taste everything.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I'm so grateful that you spent your morning with us because I think there were so many nuggets in here
Mhm.
that really, regardless of where you are in that life cycle I talked about at the beginning, like whether you're trying to get on shelf for the first time, trying to grow that relationship with your buyer, introducing something seasonal or a new SKU, trying to get new doors, diversify, look at your .com properties. Like I feel like we covered so much, but if you had like one final piece of advice for brands heading into 2025, what is top of mind for you as you look at like the evolving climate?
I think the biggest piece of advice is to be hyper focused on the customer. Know your customer, understand what they like about you, and any feedback reviews that you get, it's just a gift. Even if they hate something, it gives you an opportunity to fix it. And if you can do that before you move into the retail space, it's only going to be advantageous for you. Obviously, that's not kind of new, right? The consumer has always been the focus, but things have changed in terms of how you engage with them and how you listen to what they are telling you. And then there's just so much in the way of technology. How can AI be your friend? Not only from the perspective of getting into retail, but to also create bandwidth within your organization by eliminating some of those things that you do that keep you from being more creative and being able to spend time figuring out a way to get into retail.
And if people want to connect with you, is LinkedIn the best place to do that?
Perfect. I would love it. I would love it. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we'll link that in the show notes. This will be on YouTube. People want to
Okay,
refer back to anything in here later, but
perfect.
thank you so much. This was amazing. And I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Sam. I really appreciate having the opportunity. I feel like we could have talked for another hour about this.
We'll do another one. We'll pick another topic.
That sounds awesome. Excellent. Excellent. Well,
Thank
have
you.
a great holiday, and I really enjoyed this.